I'm Guy, 32, and despite everything, family has always meant the world to me. That's why I spent months planning a perfect Napa Valley getaway for my mom's birthday and my sister Jessica. 3 whole days of vineyards, fine dining and luxury accommodations, all on my dime. I thought maybe this time would be different. Instead, in the middle of an upscale restaurant, my mother screamed, "Stop ruining the trip with your sister." Just leave, so I did. Quietly. What she didn't realize was I had booked everything. Before I get into what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button. Have you ever bent over backward for family, only to be treated like the problem? This story might feel familiar. Growing up as the middle child between my older sister Jessica and younger brother Thomas wasn't easy. Our family dynamic was complicated from the start. My father left when I was 8, leaving my mother to raise 3 children on her own. While this was undoubtedly difficult for her, it seemed to create a pattern where Jessica became her confidant, Thomas her baby, and I somehow became the one who never quite measured up. Jessica was the academic star valedictorian, scholarship to an Ivy League school, and now working as a marketing executive. At least that's the image she maintains. Thomas was the charming baby of the family who could do no wrong, even when he dropped out of college to find himself through a series of short-lived passion projects. And then there was me, steady, reliable, but somehow always the one blamed when things went wrong. We weren't wealthy growing up. My mother worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, and I started working part-time at 15 to help with bills. While Jessica got new clothes for school, I wore hand-me-downs and never complained. I paid my own way through state college, working full-time while carrying a full course load. Now I'm a senior software engineer at a tech company, making more than enough to live comfortably and help my family when needed. The irony is that despite my financial stability, my accomplishments have always been minimized. When I got my first job in tech, my mother said, "Well, at least you're good with computers since you spent so much time playing those games." When Jessica got her marketing position, there was a family dinner celebration. The pattern was clear, but I kept hoping it would change. These days, our family dynamic remains largely the same, except now there's a financial component that complicates things further. My mother retired early due to health issues, living primarily on Social Security with occasional help from me. Jessica lives beyond her means, frequently between jobs despite her impressive resume. She's always just about to close a big deal, but somehow needs to borrow money for rent in the meantime. Over the past 5 years, I've loaned Jessica over $20,000 that was never repaid. I've covered my mother's property taxes twice, when she called in a panic about possibly losing her house. I paid for Thomas's rehab after his second DUI. Through it all, I've been cast as the practical, unimaginative one who just doesn't understand the struggles everyone else faces. Last Christmas, I gifted my mother a new refrigerator when hers broke down. Jessica gave her a scarf she likely got on clearance. Guess which gift got displayed proudly on Facebook? Hint: it wasn't the appliance that kept her food from spoiling. 3 months ago, I received a substantial promotion at work, including a significant salary increase and bonus. Instead of buying the new car I'd been saving for, I decided to plan something special for my mother's 65th birthday. A luxury trip to Napa Valley wine country seemed perfect. She had always talked about wanting to go, but never had the opportunity or means. The planning process was extensive. I researched the best time to visit, booked rooms at a boutique hotel with spa services, reserved tables at top-rated restaurants, arranged private wine tastings, and even hired a professional photographer for one afternoon to capture family memories. The total cost was approaching $10,000, but I told myself it would be worth it to create a special experience for my mother. During the planning, I called Jessica to see if she wanted to contribute. "I'd love to help, but things are tight right now," she said. "I'm waiting on my commission check. But I'll definitely treat Mom to something special while we're there." I wasn't surprised and went ahead booking everything under my name and credit card. As the trip approached, my mother called frequently with questions and special requests. The room I booked wasn't south-facing as she preferred. Could the dinner reservation be moved 30 minutes earlier? Would there be walking involved at the wineries? Each call carried an undertone that I might mess up this important occasion. Still, I accommodated every request, changed reservations, and assured her everything would be perfect. A week before the trip, my mother called to tell me Jessica had invited her college roommate Tina to join us for one of the days. "She lives near Napa and wants to meet us for the wine tasting," my mother explained. I told her it would be fine. She didn't ask if I minded or if it would affect my carefully made reservations. I spent that evening reworking the itinerary and calling the winery to add another person to our tour. Despite these warning signs, I remained optimistic. This trip would be different. My mother would finally see how much I cared. Jessica would appreciate my generosity. We would create positive memories together. Looking back, I should have recognized I was setting myself up for disappointment, but hope is a powerful thing when it comes to family. The trip began on a Friday morning when I picked up my mother from her house in my newly leased car. I had been saving for months to upgrade from my 10-year-old Honda, and though it wasn't exactly luxury, the new Mazda was a significant improvement and a point of pride for me. "This is nice," my mother said as she settled into the passenger seat. "But isn't it a bit extravagant? You know these new cars lose value the minute you drive them off the lot." I swallowed my first instinct to defend the purchase and instead focused on the positives. "I got a great deal, and the safety features are much better. I thought you'd be comfortable for the drive to the airport." "Jessica says leasing is throwing money away," she replied, adjusting her seat. "You should have talked to her first." And so it began, the subtle undermining that had characterized our relationship for decades. I changed the subject to the trip itinerary, explaining the flights I'd booked and the hotel where we'd be staying. Jessica was supposed to meet us at the airport, but when we arrived, there was no sign of her. 20 minutes after our agreed meeting time, I received a text. "Running late. Traffic. Go to gate, we'll meet you there." No apology, just an expectation that we would wait. When she finally appeared, 45 minutes late and just as boarding was about to begin, she breezed up to us with her designer luggage. "Sorry couldn't be helped." The Uber driver took a terrible route. She hugged our mother warmly, but gave me only a distracted wave. On the flight, my mother and Jessica sat together in the 2 seats I'd booked, while I sat across the aisle. For 2 hours, I watched them chat animatedly, share snacks, and laugh at inside jokes while I pretended to be absorbed in my book. When the flight attendant came by, Jessica ordered wine for herself and our mother, never asking if I wanted anything. We landed and collected our rental car, which I had also arranged and paid for. Jessica immediately claimed the front passenger seat next to me, relegating our mother to the back, then complained about my driving all the way to the hotel. "You're taking corners too fast," she critiqued. "And you should have gotten a bigger car. Mom barely has legroom back there." I had specifically chosen a mid-size SUV to ensure everyone would be comfortable, but I didn't argue. The first day was just beginning, and I was determined to maintain a positive atmosphere. The boutique hotel I'd selected was in the heart of Napa Valley, with vine-covered walls and an intimate luxury feel. I'd booked 2 rooms, one for my mother and one that Jessica and I would share to keep costs somewhat manageable. As we checked in, the front desk clerk welcomed us warmly and mentioned the champagne and chocolate-covered strawberries I'd arranged to have waiting in my mother's room. "Oh, that's not necessary," my mother said, looking somewhat embarrassed. "Guy always goes overboard." The clerk's smile faltered slightly before recovering. "Well, they're complimentary with your package, so please enjoy them." Once in her room, my mother immediately began finding issues. "The view is just of the garden, not the vineyards. And the bathroom is smaller than it looked online." Jessica nodded sympathetically while I stood there, feeling the familiar sting of unappreciated effort. "I can see if they have any other rooms available," I offered. "No, no, this is fine," my mother sighed. "We won't be in the room much anyway." For dinner that first night, I had reservations at a farm-to-table restaurant known for its seasonal menu and extensive wine list. When I mentioned it, Jessica frowned. "Actually, I looked up some places, and there's this cute bistro in downtown Napa that's supposed to be amazing. I took the liberty of making a reservation there instead. I hope that's okay." Before I could respond, my mother chimed in. "That sounds lovely, Jessica. You always find the best places." I said nothing about the non-refundable deposit I'd put down for the original restaurant. It seemed easier to go along with the change than to create conflict on our first night. At Jessica's chosen restaurant, I watched my mother and sister bond over shared plates and wine pairings, while I felt increasingly like an outsider at a table I was paying for. They reminisced about family vacations from when Jessica and I were children, somehow focusing only on memories that didn't include me or that cast me in an unflattering light. "Remember when we went to the lake and Guy got so sunburned he ruined the next 2 days of the trip?" Jessica laughed. "And he was always afraid of the water," my mother added. "So dramatic about everything." I was 11 that summer and had nearly drowned the year before when a wave pulled me under at the beach. No one had noticed for what felt like an eternity until a stranger pulled me out, coughing and terrified. My fear wasn't drama. It was trauma. But correcting them would only make me seem defensive, so I forced a smile and excused myself to the restroom. Standing alone in the bathroom, I questioned why I had thought this trip would be any different. Yet some stubborn part of me still held on to hope that things could improve over the next 2 days. I splashed water on my face, took a deep breath, and returned to the table with a renewed determination to make this work. Back in our shared room that night, Jessica took a business call at 11 p.m., speaking loudly while I tried to sleep. When I asked if she could take it in the bathroom, she rolled her eyes but complied, only to emerge 20 minutes later complaining that I was being uptight about her work commitments. The second day brought new tensions. I had arranged a private tour of 3 boutique wineries, including transportation, so we could all enjoy the tastings without worrying about driving. When we met in the lobby, Jessica was typing furiously on her phone. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just confirming some details," she replied vaguely. At the first winery, we were greeted by our guide, an enthusiastic sommelier who began explaining the history of the vineyard. 10 minutes into the tour, Jessica's phone rang, and she stepped away to answer it. When she returned, she wasn't alone. "Everyone, this is Natalie," she announced, introducing a stylishly dressed woman about her age. "She's an old friend who lives nearby. I invited her to join us for the day." "That's not a problem, right?" Our tour guide looked at me questioningly, as the tour had been arranged and paid for in advance for 3 people. "Of course it's not a problem," my mother said before I could respond. "The more the merrier." I quietly took the guide aside and arranged to pay the additional fee for Natalie's participation, adding it to my already substantial credit card bill for the trip. Throughout the winery tour, my mother and Jessica fawned over Natalie, who turned out to be a marketing director at a competing firm to Jessica's company. They discussed industry gossip while I trailed behind, occasionally attempting to engage with the sommelier's information about the wines we were tasting. During lunch at the second winery, my mother regaled Natalie with stories of Jessica's accomplishments. She was always so driven, even as a child. National Merit finalist, captain of the debate team, and now she's handling accounts for major international brands. Natalie nodded appreciatively, while Jessica pretended modesty. Neither of them mentioned that I was currently leading a team developing software used by millions of people daily. "And what do you do, Guy?" Natalie eventually asked, seemingly as an afterthought. Before I could answer, Jessica jumped in. "He works with computers. Very technical stuff." She waved her hand dismissively. "I'm actually a senior software engineer," I clarified. "I just received a promotion to lead architect for our company's main product line." "That's nice," my mother said, clearly unimpressed. Jessica just landed the Johnson account, which is worth over 7 figures to her firm. I nodded and took another sip of wine, wondering if it was too early in the day to switch from tasting portions to full glasses. As we walked between buildings at the third winery, I overheard my mother and Jessica talking, unaware I was within earshot. "He's trying too hard as usual," Jessica said quietly. "I know," my mother replied. "Always has to show off with his planning and arrangements. It's exhausting." "At least he's paying for everything," Jessica added with a laugh. "Might as well enjoy it." Their words hit like a physical blow. I slowed my pace, allowing more distance between us as I processed what I'd heard. The trip I'd spent months planning and thousands of dollars on was showing off. My generosity was something to be exploited rather than appreciated. I considered confronting them, but knew from experience it would only result in denials and accusations that I was being too sensitive. Instead, I focused on getting through the rest of the day, maintaining a pleasant facade while inwardly questioning every assumption I'd made about our family relationship. The third day of our trip was my mother's actual birthday, and I had planned what I hoped would be a perfect celebration. I woke early to confirm all the arrangements. A morning spa treatment for my mother, followed by lunch at a scenic vineyard, an afternoon of leisure, and finally, dinner at an exclusive restaurant that had required booking 3 months in advance. The spa appointment went surprisingly well. My mother returned to the hotel looking relaxed and actually thanked me for arranging it. For a brief moment, I felt a glimmer of the appreciation I'd been hoping for. "The massage was wonderful," she said. "Though Jessica says I should have asked for the hot stone treatment instead of the Swedish." And just like that, the moment was gone. Lunch at the vineyard was pleasant enough, with stunning views of rolling hills covered in grapevines. My mother seemed to be enjoying herself, and even Jessica was less critical than usual. I began to relax slightly, thinking perhaps the day would turn out well after all. "I got you something," I told my mother as we finished our meal. I handed her a small, elegantly wrapped box containing a pair of sapphire earrings I'd had custom-made to match a necklace my father had given her years ago, one of the few pieces of jewelry she still wore regularly. She opened the box and looked at the earrings with an unreadable expression. "These must have been expensive," she said finally. "They're sapphires to match your necklace," I explained, in case she hadn't made the connection. "I remembered how much you love that piece." "That's very thoughtful," she replied, closing the box without trying them on. "Thank you." Jessica handed over her gift next, a scarf in our mother's favorite color that I suspected had been purchased at the hotel gift shop that morning, given that Jessica had disappeared for 30 minutes before lunch claiming she needed to make a work call. "It's perfect," our mother exclaimed, immediately wrapping it around her shoulders. "You always know exactly what I like, Jessica." I forced a smile and suggested we head back to the hotel for some downtime before dinner. As we drove, Jessica received a call and spoke in hushed tones before announcing she needed to handle something and would meet us at the restaurant later. "Work emergency?" I asked, unable to keep a hint of skepticism from my voice. "Something like that," she replied vaguely. "Don't worry, I won't miss Mom's birthday dinner." But she did nearly miss it. Our reservation was for 7, and Jessica texted at 6:55 that she was running a few minutes behind. My mother insisted we wait in the lobby rather than be seated, despite the hostess's increasingly pointed glances at her watch. When Jessica finally arrived at 7:40, she was accompanied by Natalie from the previous day's wine tour. "I hope it's okay that I brought Natalie," she said breezily. "We ran into each other in town, and I mentioned Mom's birthday dinner. She didn't have plans, so I thought, why not?" The hostess looked at me questioningly. The restaurant was fully booked, and adding a fourth person to our table for 3 would require rearrangement. "I'm sorry, but we don't have space for an additional guest without prior notice," the hostess explained apologetically. "Can't you just squeeze in another chair?" Jessica demanded. "It's our mother's birthday." I intervened before the situation could escalate. "Let me see what I can do," I said, stepping aside with the hostess. After some negotiation and an additional fee, they agreed to accommodate us, though it would delay our seating by another 20 minutes. When I returned to the group, Jessica was complaining loudly about the restaurant's inflexibility, while my mother nodded sympathetically. Neither acknowledged my efforts to resolve the situation. We were finally seated just after 8, nearly an hour past our reservation time. The delay had thrown off the carefully orchestrated evening I had planned, including the special dessert presentation the chef had agreed to prepare. As we settled in, I tried to salvage the celebration. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said, raising my water glass in a toast. "I'm glad we could all be here together." "Yes, it's lovely," my mother replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Though I wish we could have been seated on time. I'm getting quite hungry." "That wasn't Guy's fault," Natalie pointed out, surprising me with her defense. "Adding a person last minute is always complicated at high-end restaurants." Jessica shot Natalie a look that clearly communicated she should stay out of family matters. Dinner proceeded with forced pleasantries. The food was excellent, but the atmosphere was tense. When it came time to discuss our plans for the next day, our final full day in Napa, things began to unravel completely. "I was thinking we could visit the cultural center in the morning," I suggested. "They have an exhibition on the history of winemaking in the region that's supposed to be fascinating. Then we have the afternoon cooking class I booked, where we'll prepare our own lunch with a local chef." Jessica immediately frowned. "That sounds boring." Natalie told me about this amazing spa resort that offers day passes. "I think Mom would enjoy that much more. It's her birthday trip after all." "But I've already paid deposits for these activities," I explained. The cooking class required payment in full in advance. "It's non-refundable at this point." "So," Jessica challenged, "you can afford it. Don't be so rigid about the schedule." "It's not about the money," I tried to explain. "It's about having a plan that works for everyone. The cooking class is something Mom specifically mentioned wanting to try." "That was months ago," my mother interjected. "The spa does sound nice. Can't we do that instead?" I felt my frustration rising. "If you'd mentioned wanting to change the plans earlier, I could have made different arrangements. But everything is booked and confirmed now. You're being controlling, Jessica accused. This whole trip, you've had everything scheduled down to the minute. It's supposed to be a vacation, not a military operation. I planned everything because no one else was willing to help, I replied, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to stay calm. I'm trying to make sure we all have a good experience. Well, you're failing, Jessica snapped. Mom's clearly not enjoying being dragged around according to your perfect itinerary. That's not fair, I said, looking to my mother for support that didn't come. I've been trying to accommodate everyone's requests throughout this entire trip. By throwing a fit whenever things don't go exactly as you planned, Jessica countered. Like right now. I'm not throwing a fit. I'm trying to have a reasonable conversation about tomorrow's plans. You're ruining the dinner, Jessica hissed. Just like you're trying to control every aspect of this trip. I looked at my mother, hoping she would intervene or at least provide a balanced perspective. Instead, her expression hardened as she glared at me. Stop it, she said sharply. Just stop it, Guy. I'm just trying to explain, I began. Stop ruining the trip with your sister, my mother suddenly shouted, loudly enough that diners at nearby tables turned to stare. Just leave. If you can't be flexible and enjoy yourself, then just go. The restaurant fell silent around us. I sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. My mother had just publicly humiliated me on a trip I had planned and paid for entirely. Jessica sat back with a satisfied expression, while Natalie looked uncomfortable, suddenly very interested in her plate. In that moment, something broke inside me, not just my heart, but the chain of obligation and hope that had kept me trying to win approval that would never come. 20-plus years of similar moments flashed through my mind. Family gatherings where I was the butt of jokes, achievements dismissed, efforts unacknowledged, all while I continued to provide financial and emotional support. Fine, I said quietly, placing my napkin on the table. Enjoy your dinner. I stood up with as much dignity as I could muster, nodded politely to Natalie, and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. The hostess gave me a sympathetic glance as I passed, suggesting she had witnessed similar family dramas before. As I stepped into the cool evening air, I felt simultaneously hollow and somehow lighter. For the first time in my adult life, I was walking away from the toxic pattern instead of trying to fix it. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. The walk back to the hotel was a blur. My mind raced with conflicting emotions, humiliation, anger, grief, and underneath it all, a strange sense of relief. For years, I had been trying to earn love and appreciation through generosity and accommodation. Now I was finally facing the truth. No amount of planning, spending, or self-sacrifice would ever be enough. Back in the room I shared with Jessica, I packed my belongings methodically, taking care to leave nothing behind. I wrote a brief note explaining that I was checking into another hotel and left it on her bed. No accusations, no emotional appeals, just information. At the front desk, I explained that I needed to check out early from my current room, but would be keeping my mother's room reservation intact until the original departure date. The clerk processed my request without asking questions, though her expression suggested she understood more than she let on. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" she asked gently. I hesitated, then made a decision. Actually, yes. My mother and sister may try to extend their stay or make changes to the reservations. I want to be clear that I will not be responsible for any additional charges after tonight. Everything that's already been arranged and paid for can remain as is, but nothing new should be added to my card. She nodded and made a note in the system. Understood, sir. and may I help you find alternative accommodations. Thank you, but I'll manage. I appreciated her professionalism and lack of judgment. As I walked to my car, my phone began buzzing with texts from Jessica. Where did you go? Mom is upset. You're being so dramatic right now. Come back and apologize. I silenced the notifications without responding. For once, I wasn't going to be the one apologizing for someone else's bad behavior. Driving through the darkened vineyards, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to turn around, go back, and make peace, to fall back into the familiar pattern of being the family fixer. But a stronger part recognized that this moment of crisis was also an opportunity for change. I found a small inn about 20 miles away, in a different part of wine country than where we had been staying. The night manager checked me in efficiently, and I carried my single bag to a modest but comfortable room. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Tears came unexpectedly, not just for tonight's humiliation, but for decades of similar moments. I cried for the child who was never good enough, for the teenager who worked while his sister was supported, for the adult who continued to seek approval through self-sacrifice. It wasn't an indulgent wallow in self-pity, but a necessary release of grief for a family dynamic that had shaped so much of my life. After the emotional storm passed, I felt oddly calm. I ordered a sandwich from room service, took a long shower, and for the first time in 3 days, relaxed without worrying about managing everyone else's experience. My phone continued to light up with notifications, which I glanced at but didn't engage with. From Jessica. This is so typical of you. From Mom. I don't understand why you would leave on my birthday. From Jessica again. We need the rental car. Where are you? Around midnight, the messages took on a different tone. From Jessica. There seems to be an issue with the hotel. Call me ASAP. From Mom. The front desk says you checked out. What's going on? From Jessica. Answer your phone. I could imagine what was happening. They had finished dinner and returned to the hotel, probably planning to continue the trip without me, but with all the amenities I had arranged. Now they were discovering the implications of my departure. The room I had shared with Jessica was no longer available, and while my mother's room was secured for the duration of our planned stay, any attempts to make changes or charge additional services to the room would be declined. More critically, they would soon realize that all the other arrangements, the rental car in my name, the reservations for tomorrow's activities, the return flights I had booked, were now in question. Jessica, despite her claims of professional success, was perpetually between payments and relied heavily on credit cards that were often near their limits. My mother lived primarily on her modest Social Security income. Neither of them was in a position to suddenly take over financial responsibility for an expensive Napa Valley vacation. Part of me felt guilty for putting them in this position, but another part recognized that they had put themselves in this position by treating me as nothing more than a wallet and a punching bag. For once, they would have to deal with the consequences of their actions without me rushing in to fix everything. I turned my phone off completely and went to bed. For the first time in months, I slept deeply and without interruption. The next morning, I woke feeling rested and surprisingly clear-headed. I turned my phone on briefly to check the time and saw dozens of missed calls and messages, increasingly frantic and accusatory. I turned it off again without reading them in detail. Today would be for me. After a pleasant breakfast in the inn's garden, I asked the concierge for recommendations about local attractions. Armed with a map and suggestions, I set out to explore a part of wine country I hadn't researched during my meticulous planning for the family trip. My first stop was a small family-owned winery, not on the typical tourist route. The owner himself conducted the tasting, explaining their sustainable growing practices and the history of their vineyard. When he asked if I was visiting the area alone, I hesitated before answering honestly. I was with family, but we had a disagreement. I decided it was better for everyone if I explored on my own for the rest of the trip. He nodded understandingly. Families can be complicated. Wine helps, but sometimes distance helps more. He poured me an extra taste of their reserve Pinot Noir. On the house, that simple act of kindness from a stranger touched me deeply. Throughout the day, I had similar experiences, genuine connections, with people who had no expectations or history with me. I chatted with a retired couple at lunch, joined a pottery demonstration at an artisan's workshop, and watched the sunset from a hillside viewpoint recommended by a local shopkeeper. By evening, I felt more myself than I had in years. I found a small bistro for dinner where I was seated next to a group of friends celebrating a birthday. When they discovered I was dining alone, they invited me to join them. For a few hours, I enjoyed the company of people who knew nothing about me except what I chose to share. It was refreshing and healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. Back at the inn, I finally called my closest friend from home, Sam, who had been sending concerned messages throughout the day. "Are you okay?" he asked immediately. "Your texts were pretty cryptic." I explained what had happened, trying to be fair despite my hurt feelings. "Honestly, I'm surprised it took this long for you to walk away," Sam said when I finished. "I've been watching this pattern for years. They take, and you keep giving, hoping someday they'll see your value." "I feel guilty," I admitted. "They're probably stranded right now." "They're adults," Sam pointed out. "Jessica has a job and credit cards. Your mom has friends she could call. They've been treating you like an ATM, an emotional punching bag for years. Let them figure it out for once." His words reinforced my resolve. "You're right. I need to maintain these boundaries." "So what happens now?" Sam asked. "I don't know," I answered honestly. But for the first time in a long time, that uncertainty doesn't terrify me. I spent the next morning exploring a nature preserve near the inn, hiking trails that wound through oak groves and offered spectacular views of the valley below. The physical exertion and natural beauty provided a welcome distraction from the family drama. During a break at a scenic overlook, I took a photo of the landscape and posted it to my Instagram without thinking, my first social media update since the trip began. Within minutes, my phone rang. It was Jessica. I almost declined the call, but decided it was time to face the situation. "Hello," I answered neutrally. "Finally," Jessica exclaimed. "Where the hell are you? We've been trying to reach you for almost 24 hours. "I'm at a different hotel," I replied calmly. "I left a note explaining that." "Your note said nothing useful. We need the rental car. The hotel won't extend Mom's stay without your credit card. We're basically stranded here." "I'm sorry you're inconvenienced," I said, surprising myself with my calm tone. "But I'm not coming back." "Don't be ridiculous," Jessica snapped. "You can't just abandon us because you got your feelings hurt at dinner. Mom didn't mean what she said. You know how she gets." "That's the problem, Jessica. I do know how she gets and how you get, and how this whole dynamic works. I'm not participating anymore." "What is that supposed to mean?" Her voice rose in pitch. "It means I'm taking care of myself for once. You and Mom will need to figure out your return arrangements." "We can't afford to change the flights," she practically shouted. and we need the rental car to get to the airport. You could take a shuttle, I suggested. Or perhaps Natalie could help, since you two have become such good friends. This isn't funny, Guy. Mom is really upset. Her birthday is ruined. I'm not trying to be funny. I'm serious about not coming back. There was a pause before Jessica changed tactics, her voice softening. Look, we all said things we didn't mean. Why don't you come back so we can talk about this like adults? Mom really wants to see you. I've spent years trying to talk about these issues. No one ever listens. That's not fair. We listen. When have you ever taken my feelings seriously, Jessica? When have either of you acknowledged how you treat me? She didn't have an answer for that. After an uncomfortable silence, she said, Mom wants to talk to you directly. We know where you are now. We're coming there. Before I could protest, she hung up. I looked at my recent Instagram post and realized it had tagged my location at the nature preserve. They couldn't know which inn I was staying at, but they could find the preserve easily enough. I considered leaving before they arrived, but decided against it. Running away wouldn't resolve anything. If they were making the effort to find me, perhaps there was a chance for an honest conversation. I finished my hike and went to the preserve's small cafe to wait. About an hour later, I saw my mother walking through the parking lot alone. No Jessica in sight. That was surprising. Usually, she sent Jessica to fight her battles. My mother spotted me through the cafe window and came inside. She looked tired and unusually subdued as she approached my table. May I sit down? She asked formally. I nodded, bracing myself for whatever was coming next: guilt trips, accusations, or demands. She sat across from me, fidgeting with her purse strap. You disappeared, she said finally. I left a note. A 3-line note saying you were going to another hotel. After walking out during my birthday dinner. After you shouted at me to leave in front of an entire restaurant, I corrected gently. She had the grace to look embarrassed. I was frustrated. You and Jessica were arguing, and it was spoiling the evening. Mom, Jessica and I weren't arguing equally. She was attacking me for trying to maintain the plans I had spent months arranging, and you took her side. As you always do. That's not fair, she protested weakly. Isn't it? Can you name one time in the past decade when you've taken my side in a disagreement with Jessica? Or even stayed neutral? She opened her mouth, then closed it again, unable to provide an example. I've spent years trying to win your approval, I continued. I've paid bills, funded vacations, bought appliances, and received nothing but criticism in return. This trip alone cost me nearly $10,000, and neither of you has shown a shred of gratitude. We said thank you, my mother insisted. No, you didn't. Not once. You complained about the hotel room view, changed restaurant reservations without telling me, invited extra people to events I had paid for, and then accused me of ruining everything when I expressed the mildest objection to last-minute changes. My mother's expression shifted between defensiveness and confusion. You're exaggerating. Am I? Tell me honestly, if Jessica had planned this trip instead of me, would you have criticized her choices the way you've criticized mine? Would you have told her to leave if she disagreed with a change of plans? The question hung between us, unanswered because we both knew the truth. Where's Jessica now? I asked finally. Shopping, my mother admitted. She said she needed to clear her head after all the drama. I couldn't help but laugh. Of course she is. Even now, when you're supposedly in a crisis, she's off doing what she wants while I'm expected to fix everything. We are in a crisis, my mother said, her voice rising slightly. The hotel won't extend our stay without your credit card. We have no way to get to the airport. Jessica's card was declined when we tried to arrange a different rental car. That sounds difficult, I acknowledged. But it's not my crisis to solve anymore. What does that mean? She asked, genuine worry creeping into her voice. It means I'm not coming back to the hotel. I'm not giving you my credit card. I'm not driving you to the airport. For once, you and Jessica will need to figure things out yourselves. But we can't, she exclaimed, panic evident now. Jessica's cards are maxed out, and I only brought enough cash for souvenirs. Then call a friend for help. Or ask Natalie, since Jessica invited her to join us without asking me. Or contact Thomas to wire you some money. Thomas doesn't have any money, she scoffed. You know that. Yes, I do know that. Just like I know that Jessica probably isn't between payments at work as she claims. And I know that you could have saved enough from your Social Security to handle emergencies instead of redecorating your living room twice in the past year. My mother stared at me, shocked by my directness. You've changed, she said accusingly. No, I corrected her. I've finally stopped pretending. There's a difference. We sat in silence for several minutes, the magnitude of the shift in our relationship settling between us. Finally, my mother spoke again, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. What do you want from us, Guy? It was the first time she had ever asked me that question, and it caught me off guard. What did I want? I thought carefully before answering. I want acknowledgement of the years of financial and emotional support I've provided. I want apologies for the dismissive way you've both treated me. I want a relationship based on mutual respect instead of exploitation. And most importantly, I want you both to understand that continuing as we have is no longer an option. My mother looked down at the table, avoiding my gaze. And if we can't give you those things, then we'll have a very different kind of relationship going forward, one with firm boundaries and limited contact. She nodded slowly, seeming to absorb the reality of the situation for the first time. Jessica won't like this. Probably not, I agreed. But that's not my primary concern anymore. I don't know how to fix this, she admitted. That's actually a good start, I told her. Recognizing there's a problem that needs fixing. After our conversation at the cafe, I agreed to meet my mother and Jessica at a neutral location, a public park in downtown Napa, to discuss practical matters. I arrived to find them both sitting tensely on a bench, Jessica scrolling through her phone, while my mother watched people pass by. Thank you for coming, my mother said when she saw me. Jessica merely nodded, her expression guarded. Let's talk about the immediate situation first, I suggested, sitting on a neighboring bench to maintain some physical distance. You need to get home, and you need accommodations until then. Yes, Jessica said tersely. Since you abandoned us, we've been struggling to figure out what to do. I ignored the bait. I've thought about it, and I'm willing to help with some conditions. Both of them looked at me with surprise. They had clearly expected either a complete capitulation or a total abandonment. What conditions? My mother asked cautiously. First, I'll pay for one additional night at the hotel, in a single room that you'll share. Second, I'll arrange transportation to the airport for your original return flight. Third, I'll make sure the rental car is returned properly, so there are no additional charges. Jessica frowned. That's it. What about the rest of the activities you planned? What about meals? We can't afford to eat at the restaurants around here. You have options, I replied calmly. You can find less expensive places to eat. You can ask Natalie for help. You can cut your trip short and change your flights to return earlier, though there would be change fees. This is ridiculous, Jessica snapped. You're punishing us because Mom lost her temper once. This isn't about punishment, I explained. It's about establishing boundaries. For years, I've allowed myself to be taken for granted and treated disrespectfully. That ends now. So you're using money to control us, Jessica accused. No, I'm choosing how to spend my own money based on how I'm treated. There's a difference. My mother, who had been quiet, finally spoke. I think what Guy is saying makes sense. Jessica looked at her in shock as she continued. We have been taking him for granted. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and he's right. Jessica's mouth literally fell open. Mom, you can't be serious. I am, my mother said with unusual firmness. Guy planned this entire trip as a gift for me, and we've done nothing but complain and change his arrangements without considering his feelings. That wasn't right. It was my turn to be surprised. In all my years, I had never heard my mother acknowledge any fault in her treatment of me, especially not in front of Jessica. Thank you for saying that, I said quietly. Jessica looked between us, clearly feeling outnumbered. Fine. Whatever. So we're stuck with one room for tonight, and then going home tomorrow. That's one option, I confirmed. Or you can accept my original offer with a different attitude, and I'll consider reinstating some of the original plans. What does that mean exactly? My mother asked. It means if you both can genuinely acknowledge the pattern of behavior that led to this situation and commit to changing it, I'm willing to salvage what's left of this trip. Not for my sake, but because I did want this to be a special birthday for you, Mom. Jessica rolled her eyes, but my mother nodded thoughtfully. I would like that, but I don't want to just say words you want to hear without meaning them. Her honesty was refreshing. I appreciate that. How about this? We'll keep things simple for today. You two will share a room tonight as planned. I'll remain at my current accommodations. Tomorrow morning, we can meet for breakfast and decide whether to continue with a modified version of the original itinerary or arrange for your return home. And what exactly do you expect from us at this breakfast? Jessica asked suspiciously. Just honesty, I replied. About how we've been relating to each other and whether we all want to work on changing that. We worked out the practical details. I would call the hotel to arrange for them to stay one more night in a single room. They would take a taxi back, and I would meet them at a nearby breakfast place at 9 the next morning. As we prepared to part ways, my mother surprised me by stepping forward and hugging me briefly. I'm sorry about what I said at the restaurant, she whispered. I didn't mean it. It wasn't a full acknowledgement of the larger pattern, but it was a start. Jessica maintained her distance, clearly unhappy with the new power dynamic, but smart enough to recognize she had few alternatives at the moment. I returned to my inn feeling cautiously optimistic. Not about an immediate transformation in our family relationships that would take time and consistent effort from all of us, but about my own ability to maintain healthy boundaries going forward. The next morning, I arrived at the breakfast place a few minutes early and was surprised to find my mother already there, sitting alone. Where's Jessica? I asked as I joined her. She's checking out of the hotel, my mother explained. She'll be here soon. We ordered coffee while waiting. There was an awkward silence before my mother spoke. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About how we treat you. I nodded, encouraging her to continue. It's not easy to hear, but I think you're right. I do treat you and Jessica differently. I always have. Why? I asked, the question I'd wanted to ask for decades. She sighed deeply. Honestly, I'm not sure I fully understand it myself. Part of it is that you remind me so much of your father, not just in looks, but in your practical nature, your steadiness. After he left, that similarity was difficult for me. It wasn't a complete explanation, but it was more insight than she had ever offered before. Jessica has always been more like me, she continued. Dramatic, emotional. It was easier to connect with her. And then it just became a pattern. I never stopped to think about how it affected you. It affected me deeply, I said quietly. It still does. I know that now, she acknowledged. And I want to do better. I can't promise I'll change overnight, but I want to try. Jessica arrived before I could respond, sliding into the booth next to our mother. She looked tired and less combative than the day before. The room is all checked out, she reported, then turned to me. So what's the verdict? Are we staying or going? That depends, I replied. Have you thought about what we discussed yesterday? Jessica glanced at our mother, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, she admitted reluctantly. And while I think you're being overly sensitive about some things, I can see how it might have seemed like we weren't appreciative of the trip you planned. It wasn't exactly a heartfelt acknowledgement, but from Jessica, it was significant progress. Thank you for saying that, I responded. Here's what I propose. We continue with a modified version of the original plan. You'll keep your current room arrangement, sharing a single room rather than the original setup. I'll maintain my separate accommodations. We'll do the cooking class I arranged for today because it's non-refundable, and then have dinner separately. Tomorrow, I'll drive you both to the airport for our original return flight. And what about the spa day I wanted to do? Jessica asked. That would be your responsibility to arrange and pay for, I explained. I'm covering what I already committed to, but not new activities. Jessica started to protest, but our mother cut her off. That's more than fair, Jessica. We should be grateful Guy is willing to salvage any part of the trip after how we've behaved. Jessica looked surprised at our mother's rebuke, but nodded grudgingly. Fine. The cooking class could be fun anyway. We finalized the arrangements over breakfast, the conversation gradually shifting to more neutral topics. There were still moments of tension and old patterns threatening to reassert themselves, but each time, I gently but firmly maintained my boundaries, and surprisingly, my mother occasionally supported me. The cooking class that afternoon was actually enjoyable. We learned to make fresh pasta and a seasonal sauce from a local chef, and the activity provided enough structure to minimize opportunities for conflict. Jessica even complimented my technique with the pasta machine, a small but meaningful moment of positive interaction. We parted ways after the class, agreeing to meet the next morning for the drive to the airport. At my inn that evening, I reflected on the dramatic shifts that had occurred over the past 3 days. The trip hadn't gone as planned, not even close, but perhaps it had accomplished something more important than a perfect birthday celebration. It had forced a long-overdue confrontation with unhealthy family dynamics that had shaped much of my adult life. The next morning, the drive to the airport was surprisingly pleasant. My mother sat in the front passenger seat and actually engaged me in conversation about my work and life in a way she rarely had before. Jessica was quieter than usual in the back seat, perhaps still processing the new family dynamic. At the airport, as we prepared to part ways at security, my mother hugged me and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on us completely. I know we didn't deserve another chance." "We're family," I replied. "But things need to be different going forward." "They will be," she promised. "At least I'll try my best." Jessica's goodbye was more reserved, but lacked the hostility of our previous interactions. "Thanks for the ride," she said, then added awkwardly, "and for the cooking class. It was actually pretty cool." It wasn't a transformative family vacation by any conventional measure, but as I drove back to return the rental car, I felt a cautious hope that it might be the beginning of a healthier chapter in our complicated family story. 2 months after the Napa Valley trip, I was sitting in my apartment when my phone rang. It was my mother, calling for our now weekly check-in. This regular communication was one of several changes that had emerged since our confrontation. "How was your week?" she asked after we exchanged greetings. "Busy but good," I replied. "We launched the new software version, and it's been well received." "That's wonderful," she said, and I could hear genuine interest in her voice. "You must be relieved after all those late nights you mentioned last week." This simple acknowledgement of my work and efforts still felt novel. In the weeks following our return from Napa, my mother had made consistent, if sometimes awkward, attempts to engage with my life in a more meaningful way. Our conversations had evolved from surface pleasantries to more substantial exchanges about our daily experiences, thoughts, and feelings. "How about you?" I asked. "Did you try that new recipe you mentioned?" "I did. It turned out pretty well, though I think next time I'll use less garlic." She paused before adding, "Jessica came over for dinner last night." Jessica had been the slower of the two to adjust to our new family dynamic. While my mother had embraced the opportunity for a reset in our relationship, Jessica had initially maintained a defensive distance, clearly uncomfortable with the shift in our traditional roles. "How did that go?" I asked cautiously. "Better than last time," my mother said. "She actually helped with the dishes without being asked." I laughed. "That's progress." She also mentioned she's starting financial counseling. Apparently, her company offers it as an employee benefit. This was surprising news. Jessica had always been intensely private about her financial situation, preferring to maintain the illusion of success while quietly seeking loans from family members when necessary. "That's great," I said sincerely. "It takes courage to ask for help with that kind of thing." "I think seeing your boundaries made both of us realize we needed to make some changes," my mother admitted. "I've been looking at my own spending habits too. It's not easy at my age, but I'm trying." These small shifts represented significant progress in our family's healing process. The immediate aftermath of the Napa trip had been awkward, with Jessica avoiding my calls and my mother making tentative, sometimes clumsy attempts to connect differently. There had been backsliding into old patterns, moments of frustration on all sides, and times when I questioned whether real change was possible. But gradually, subtly, things had begun to transform. 2 weeks after our return, my mother had called to tell me she'd returned a decorative vase she'd purchased, deciding it was an unnecessary expense. It was a small gesture, but symbolically important. The first time I could remember her voluntarily practicing financial restraint. Jessica's evolution had been less linear. She'd canceled our usual monthly lunch after the trip, then reluctantly agreed to meet after our mother's intervention. That first post-Napa encounter had been tense, with Jessica alternating between defensiveness and forced politeness. But by our second meeting, something had shifted. Perhaps she'd had time to reflect, or maybe the reality of her financial situation had finally sunk in. Whatever the cause, she'd actually asked about my work with what seemed like genuine interest, and had even paid for her own meal without comment. My own healing journey had been equally complex. After years of being the family fixer and financial safety net, adjusting to a new role required conscious effort. I'd started working with a therapist who specialized in family dynamics, gradually unpacking the patterns that had shaped my relationships and self-perception. "There's something else I wanted to tell you," my mother said, bringing me back to our current conversation. Your Aunt Barbara made that comment again about you never finishing college. My Aunt Barbara, my mother's older sister, had a long history of making subtly disparaging remarks about me at family gatherings. And, I prompted, expecting the usual non-response from my mother. And I told her that was nonsense. I reminded her that you put yourself through school while working full-time, which is more than most people could handle, and that you're now leading a development team at a major tech company. I was momentarily speechless. In all my life, I couldn't remember my mother defending me against her sister's criticisms. "Thank you," I said finally. "That means a lot." "I should have done it years ago," she replied simply. After we hung up, I sat thinking about the distance we'd traveled in just 2 months. The changes weren't dramatic or complete. We still had moments of falling into old dynamics, and Jessica in particular struggled with the new boundaries I maintained around financial support. But there was undeniable progress, small victories that accumulated into meaningful change. My personal growth extended beyond family relationships. With the confidence that came from finally standing up for myself, I had become more assertive in other areas of my life. At work, I'd successfully advocated for additional resources for my team. In my social life, I'd started dating again after a long hiatus, meeting a woman named Marie who appreciated my directness and reliability qualities my family had often dismissed as boring. Marie and I had been seeing each other for about a month, and her perspective as an outsider helped me recognize how abnormal some of my family dynamics had been. "You're not responsible for fixing everyone else's problems," she'd told me during one of our early conversations. "You deserve relationships where you receive as much as you give." The Thanksgiving holiday was approaching, typically a challenging time for our family. In previous years, I had handled most of the preparations and expenses while receiving minimal appreciation. This year would be different. We had agreed to a potluck approach, with each person responsible for specific dishes and my mother hosting at her house. I was bringing dessert rather than managing the entire meal, a small but significant redistribution of responsibility. More importantly, I was approaching the gathering with a new mindset. I no longer needed my family's approval to validate my worth. I could love them while maintaining healthy boundaries. I could be generous without allowing myself to be exploited. I could engage authentically without taking responsibility for everyone else's happiness. The lessons from Napa Valley had been painful but transformative. First, true generosity comes from the heart, not from obligation or the hope of receiving approval. When giving is motivated by a desperate need for acknowledgement, it creates a cycle of disappointment and resentment. Second, maintaining boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for healthy relationships. By allowing myself to be consistently undervalued and exploited, I wasn't just harming myself, but enabling harmful patterns that ultimately damaged our entire family system. Third, sometimes a crisis is necessary for growth. Had I not walked away that night in the restaurant, had I continued accommodating and placating as I always had, nothing would have changed. It took a breaking point to create the possibility of a new beginning. Fourth, healing isn't linear or perfect. There are still difficult moments, misunderstandings, and occasions when we all slip into old habits. The difference now is that we have a new awareness and a shared, if sometimes tenuous, commitment to relating differently. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, I've learned that my worth isn't determined by others' appreciation of me. It exists independently of external validation. This realization has been the most liberating aspect of my journey, the knowledge that I am enough, just as I am, regardless of whether anyone else recognizes it. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about how differently things might have unfolded if I hadn't found the courage to walk away in Napa. I might still be trapped in the same destructive patterns, sacrificing my self-respect on the altar of family approval, never experiencing the genuine connection that becomes possible when relationships are built on mutual respect rather than exploitation. The road ahead won't be perfect. Old habits die hard, and there will surely be setbacks. But for the first time in my adult life, I'm approaching family relationships with hope rather than dread, with authenticity rather than desperate people-pleasing. And that, more than any external circumstance, feels like true freedom. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you love to protect your own well-being? What boundaries have you created in your relationships that have led to positive change? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to prioritize their own emotional health. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply say enough.